Angelic Encounters, stories of hope and healing. Thank you for joining us today. In this episode, we have 3 inspiring stories. We hope these stories uplift your spirit and remind you of the power of faith and the presence of angels in our lives. Welcome to this poignant story about hope and resilience. Meet Melissa and Brandon, a young couple from Knoxville, Tennessee. Their journey to start a family faced heart-wrenching challenges, leading Melissa into a dark place. In the face of despair, she finds an unexpected source of hope and embarks on a transformative journey. Join us as we explore their inspiring story.
There are 2 types of people in the world: those who hear the ticking of a clock and think of time, and those who hear it and think of loss. Unfortunately, I became intimately acquainted with the latter. The ticking was not just marking seconds and minutes, it became the soundtrack to a dream slipping away. Each month was measured by the hope of becoming a mother, only to be met with disappointment. The endless counting, month after month, felt like a lifetime of heartache and longing unfulfilled. Time, they say, heals all wounds. However, I discovered that time can also be a relentless adversary. It did not heal me. It chipped away at something inside, a little piece of hope with every passing month of trying and failing to conceive. My husband, Brandon, bless his heart, was one of those steady types. The kind of man who would hold your hand through a storm and tell you everything would be all right. He would rub my back every night, whispering promises of a future we both desperately wanted. He even suggested we plan out our future home improvements, imagining how we would decorate the nursery or set up the playroom. Each idea a bittersweet reminder of the family we longed for. But the yearning, that deep, gut-wrenching ache, was a different beast altogether. It was a constant gnawing, an emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. Some people might say grief comes in waves. For me, it felt like a constant tide, pulling me further and further out to sea. Every month, I would take a pregnancy test, hoping for the positive result that never came. The anticipation, the waiting, and the disappointment became a cruel cycle. Each negative test felt like another piece of my heart breaking, a reminder of the family we couldn't seem to have. The hope I clung to grew weaker with every passing month, and the grief became more pronounced. Then, one month, the test was positive. The joy that filled our hearts was indescribable. We started making plans, dreaming of the life we would have with our child. It felt like a miracle, a long-awaited blessing. But then came the night that the pain started. I was rushed to the hospital, and there, under the cold, sterile lights, I lost the baby. Some might call it a medical term, a biological event. I called it a thief. It stole that future, shattered that fragile dream. Grief was not just sadness. It was a monster, a suffocating weight that settled in my chest and would not leave. The world, once bright and full of possibilities, faded. Like an old photograph left out in the sun. Joy became a distant memory, replaced by this hollow ache, a constant reminder of what I had lost. The pain of loss became unbearable. I started to contemplate ending my own life, thinking it might be the only way to escape the constant torment. The thought crept into my mind, offering a false sense of relief from the overwhelming grief. I would lie awake at night, staring into the darkness, feeling the weight of despair pulling me under completely. And then, one night as I lay in bed, I heard a voice. At first, it was just a murmur, a soft melody in the quiet of the night. But it grew stronger, a gentle presence that soothed the storm inside me. It felt otherworldly. A comforting guide in the darkness. Of course, I was scared. I thought I was losing my mind. But as the nights passed, that voice became a source of comfort, a light in the darkness. I came to know that voice, to feel its love. It felt like an angel, a celestial being sent to mend my broken heart. Over the next few months, that angel visited me every night, offering comfort and support. With each visit, the grip of despair loosened, replaced by a fragile peace. Healing, it's not a straight line. It's more like a winding road, full of twists and turns. My marriage, it was strained, stretched thin by the grief and the constant pressure of trying to have a baby. Arguments, they happened. Fueled by frustration and resentment. But that angel, it was always there, offering gentle guidance. It helped me see things from Brandon's perspective, to understand his own struggles with grief and the pressure he felt to give me what I wanted most. Through the angel's gentle nudges, I began to feel God's love, a comforting embrace that warmed me and reassured me. I learned to talk more openly, to share my fears and vulnerabilities without fear of judgment, trusting that God's love would see us through. We even went to counseling, poured our hearts out to each other, and slowly, carefully, we started rebuilding our relationship, one fragile piece at a time, under God's grace. Something shifted inside me. That emptiness, it started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. I realized that my journey, though full of sorrow, had given me something, a deep understanding, an empathy that could help others. I realized that God, in His wisdom, had allowed me to experience this loss, not as punishment, but as a way to make me stronger. And so, I felt drawn to helping women who had walked the same path, their hearts aching with the same loss. I shared my story, not as a victim, but as a testament to God's love and grace. I spoke of the angel, a reminder that maybe we all have a celestial guide on our journey, a light in the darkest times. Today, I'm a counselor, helping others through the maze of grief. I use my own experiences, the lessons learned in the depths of despair, not as burdens, but as a source of compassion. I share my story, not to dwell on the pain, but to show the way to hope and healing. I draw on the memories of the angel, the warmth of its love, and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. I believe that inside each of us, even in the face of unimaginable loss, there's an indomitable spirit, a spark of God's grace waiting to be ignited. I believe that God, in His mercy, has given us everything we need to overcome any challenge. My job, as I see it, is to help others fan that spark, to guide them toward the light, and to remind them that they're not alone, that they're surrounded by love, both human and divine, and that even in the darkest valleys, hope and healing are always possible.
In the heart of a war-torn world, a young boy faced the horrors of conflict. This is his story of survival, a story marked by faith, hope, and the extraordinary power of divine intervention.
It was April 1945, and the relentless advance of the Soviet army was casting a long shadow over Arnsdorf. The once vibrant town was now a ghost, haunted by the echoes of explosions and the distant rumble of artillery. At 7 years old, I was too young to fully comprehend the horrors of war. Yet, I was old enough to feel the gnawing hunger and the chilling fear that gripped our town. Our family had been without food or water for nearly 5 days. Each passing day seemed longer than the last, our hope diminishing with every rumble of distant artillery. My mother, once the pillar of strength in our household, was now a shadow of her former self. The relentless hunger had sapped her energy, leaving her barely able to care for my baby sister. She tried to shield us from the worst of it, but her gaunt face and weakened voice betrayed the severity of our situation. My baby sister, too young to understand, cried incessantly, her frail body demanding the nourishment we could no longer provide. Desperation drove me out into the dangerous streets. The once plentiful stores were now empty, looted or destroyed. So I ventured out, a desperate search for any scraps of sustenance to bring back to my family. A sharp breeze swept through the ruins, sending chills down my spine despite the supposed warmth of spring. I huddled closer to my thin coat, my breath misting in the cool air. Each step was a challenge, the rubble treacherous underfoot. Desperation fueled my search, clinging to any hint of hope, any chance of finding something, anything, that might help my family. As I rounded a corner, a sudden explosion shook the ground. A nearby building had collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. I ducked instinctively, my heart pounding in my chest. The war was never far away, a constant threat that hung over our heads. As I wandered through the ruins, a flicker of light caught my eye. A faint glow emanated from a doorway down the street. I squinted, trying to discern the source of the light. But as I drew closer, the light seemed to waver and disappear, leaving me puzzled. Before I could ponder the mystery, the earth shook with the thunderous roar of incoming artillery. The sky erupted in a fiery display as shells rained down on the city. Panic seized me, and I sprinted through the streets, dodging falling debris in the relentless barrage. I sought shelter in a half-collapsed building, diving into a narrow opening that led to the basement. The air was thick with dust and the stench of decay. As I huddled in the darkness, the building shuddered with each explosion. I closed my eyes, praying for the ordeal to end. A blinding light filled the room. It was a light unlike any I had ever seen, a celestial glow that seemed to pierce the darkness. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the shattered space. "Do not be afraid." In that moment, the terror that had consumed me vanished. A sense of peace washed over me, a peace that defied the chaos outside. The world outside was a cacophony of explosions and screams, but within the confines of that small, dusty room, there was an overwhelming sense of calm. It was as if the hand of God had reached down to protect me, shielding me from the horrors of war. The dust-laden air seemed to still, and not a single particle disturbed the stillness of the room. I sat there, awestruck, for what felt like hours. I knew then that I had been touched by something divine, something far beyond human understanding. The fear and uncertainty that had defined my life up until that point had been replaced by a profound sense of peace and purpose. When the artillery finally subsided, I emerged from the basement, cautious and uncertain. I made my way back to where our home once stood, only to find the entire building had collapsed. The sight of the ruins brought a wave of grief over me. The realization that my mother and sister were likely trapped beneath the rubble was unbearable. Grief washed over me, but it was tempered by the faith that had been ignited within me. The following years were a blur of hardship and survival. Post-war Germany was a harsh place for a young orphan like me. I grew up in an orphanage, the memories of my family and that divine encounter my only solace. In the years that followed, I carried the memory of that divine encounter with me. It was a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. That encounter shaped my life, guiding my choices and inspiring my faith. It taught me the power of belief, the importance of hope, and the enduring love of God. I eventually emigrated to the United States, where I dedicated my life to the ministry. I joined the clergy, sharing the message of God's love and mercy. To this day, I draw strength from that holy light that enveloped me in my darkest hour. It is a reminder of the divine power that can transform even the most hopeless situations.
In the heart of Los Angeles, 2021, amidst the bustling chaos of a modern metropolis, lies the poignant tale of a dedicated nurse battling her own demons. This story explores the depths of human despair and the divine intervention that rekindles hope and purpose.
The sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the Cancer Care Center had become my second home. For decades, I'd navigated their labyrinthine paths, witnessing the cyclical dance of life and death. I'd seen the flickering hope in the eyes of the newly diagnosed, the weary resignation of the chronically ill, and the final, peaceful surrender of the dying. Each patient was a unique story, a chapter in the grand tragedy of human existence. But one story, in particular, etched itself into my soul, a wound that refused to heal. A little girl, no more than 5, with eyes as bright and innocent as my own niece's. For weeks, I watched as the relentless disease consumed her, her once vibrant spirit fading with each passing day. I held her hand, whispered comforting lies, and promised her a future that I knew, deep down, would never come. Her death, a stark and brutal reminder of mortality's cruel grip, shattered my already fragile faith. The world, once filled with hope and promise, now seemed bleak and meaningless. The line between empathy and despair blurred, and I found myself drowning in a sea of grief. To numb the pain, I turned to the silent, insidious comfort of addiction. The pills, stolen from the very hospital where I worked, offered a temporary reprieve from the harsh reality. They masked the guilt, the sorrow, and the profound sense of emptiness that consumed me. In the haze of the drugs, I could forget the faces of the dying, the cries of the bereaved. For years, I existed in a state of perpetual twilight, a ghost in the halls of the hospital. I watched as countless others suffered and died, my heart growing colder with each passing day. The once compassionate nurse was now a mere shell of her former self, a hollow vessel driven by despair and addiction. I was working the overnight shift, the ward eerily quiet. I sat in a worn, vinyl chair, my gaze fixed on the tiny, frail form of a child. Her breathing was shallow, each breath a struggle. Another life slipping away, another heart breaking. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, a familiar sensation that had become a constant companion. I closed my eyes, seeking respite from the relentless demands of my job. In the quiet darkness, a soft, ethereal glow began to illuminate the room. A figure emerged from the light, a being of radiant beauty and infinite compassion. Fear and awe filled me as I recognized the angelic form. "Do not fear," the angelic voice soothed, cutting through my panic. "I come to offer you hope." I stared, wide-eyed, unable to speak. The angel's gaze pierced my soul, revealing the depths of my despair. "Your heart, once filled with compassion, has grown weary," the angel continued. "The weight of suffering has dimmed your light. But know that even in the darkest night, hope endures. You have been a beacon of light to many, a comfort in their darkest hours. But your own light has dimmed. It is time to rekindle your spirit, to embrace your divine purpose." A wave of confusion washed over me. "What purpose?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What about this child?" I continued, my heart aching with concern. The angel's expression softened. "Before this night is over, this child will be with God, in a place of happiness and joy that you cannot even imagine." Tears welled in my eyes as the angel's words sank in, bringing both sorrow and peace. "A purpose greater than you can imagine," the angel replied. "God has a plan for you, a plan filled with love, grace, and endless possibilities. You will face trials and tribulations, but you will emerge stronger and more compassionate than ever before." As the angel spoke, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The weight of my despair began to lift, replaced by a glimmer of hope. "Embrace the future, my child," the angel said, his voice filled with love and understanding. "The path ahead may be uncertain, but know that you are never alone. God's love will guide your steps and illuminate your way." With a final, reassuring smile, the angel vanished, leaving me alone with a newfound sense of purpose. As I turned my gaze back to the child, a sense of peace washed over me. I knew that even in the face of death, hope and love could prevail. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to see death not as an end, but as a transition to a place of unimaginable peace and joy. The knowledge that those who passed under my care were going to a better place filled me with renewed strength. I was no longer crushed by their losses, but instead found solace in knowing they had reached a divine destination. This understanding rekindled my compassion and purpose, and I resumed my duties with a heart full of hope and a spirit strengthened by faith.
Thank you for listening to these heartfelt stories. I hope they inspire you to recognize the true power of faith and the presence of angels in our times of need. If these stories touched you, please like and subscribe for more uplifting content. Stay blessed and see you next time.